Help me! He has a knife!
The CEO signed, hands shaking behind the elevator glass. A corporate elevator stopped dead. Then the CEO signed one terrifying message. Through the glass, she stared at the night maintenance worker and silently mouthed panic as a man behind her raised a knife. Instead of freezing like everyone else, the single dad didn't shout, didn't run. He simply set his toolbox down like he'd trained for this. And in minutes, the same people who treated him invisible would be watching him become the only reason anyone walked out alive. Because this wasn't about status or titles. It was about who stays steady when fear takes over. Before I show you the exact moment when the CEO's hand spelled help and the single dad answered back in flawless sign language, you need to understand why he was there in the first place. By the way, where are you watching from? Tell me in the comments below. The lobby of Holt Dynamics was polished, intimidate, marble that amplified every footstep, glass walls that reflected fear back at you. Tonight, those walls framed a stalled private elevator like a display case. Inside, the CEO's eyes were wide, her assistant pinned to her side, and behind them a hooded man held a knife too close to skin. The building's soft music kept playing, absurdly calm, while people froze beneath the chandelier's cold light. The contrarian snapback came in the quiet. This wasn't a hero in a suit. It was a single dad with oil on his sleeves. It was a man who'd learned that panic spreads faster than smoke, and he carried steadiness the way other people carried authority. Evan Calder was supposed to be invisible down here. Night maintenance meant service corridors, not center stage under executive eyes. He'd taken the job because it didn't ask questions, because it paid enough to keep his son's hearing appointments on schedule, because anonymity felt like armor. Earlier, he'd been reminded of his place the usual way. Small, sharp cuts. A guard had waved him around the front desk without looking up. A junior manager had barked that maintenance doesn't touch executive elevators, as if the metal cared who rode inside it. Even the CEO, hours ago, had swept through the lobby with assistants and never once glanced toward the people who kept the building alive. He swallowed it, because dignity didn't cover rent. At home, Lucas would be asleep with his hearing aids on the bedside table, lined up like tiny shields. Evan pictured the boy's fingers practicing signs in the air. Good night, love you, promise, and the ache under his ribs tightened. Lucas was the reason he worked nights, the reason he didn't raise his voice when someone mocked his uniform. Lucas was also why he'd buried the old version of himself so deep it sometimes felt like another man entirely. The elevator jolted. A metallic groan rolled through the shaft, loud enough to vibrate the marble. The intruder shifted, blade flashing under the lobby lights, and the assistant let out a broken sound. Security Director Von Reese strode forward, radio crackling in his hand. "Back up," Vaughn snapped. "Sir, drop the knife. Now." The intruder flinched, exactly the wrong reaction. His grip tightened. The CEO's throat bobbed as she forced herself not to scream. Her gaze cut through the chaos and landed on Evan, like she'd found the only person who wasn't guessing. Her hands rose again, fast and precise despite the tremble. "Help me, he has a knife." Evan's response was immediate, fluid. He signed back without thinking. "I see you. Stay still. Look at me." A hush rippled outward. Someone whispered, "He's signing." Vaughn turned, irritation sharpening his face. "You. Maintenance. Get out of the line of fire." Evan didn't move. He kept his eyes on the intruder's shoulders, on the minute tremor in the knife hand. He spoke softly, not to challenge authority, but to stop it from making things worse. "You're crowding him. Your shouting's escalating him." "This is my scene," Vaughn hissed. "Then control it," Evan said, calm enough to sting. He lifted his hands again for the CEO, offering rhythm. "Breathe with me. In, out." Her shoulders followed. The assistant's eyes flicked to his hands, clinging to the pattern like a rope. The intruder noticed the silent conversation and hesitated, confused by a language he didn't own. That hesitation was a crack. Evan felt it in his bones. He took one slow step forward, placing himself where power never looked, and the entire lobby held its breath. Vaughn's radio spat static, then an alarm chirped and died. Evan heard his own heartbeat, steady, and pictured Lucas's small hands signing promise. He raised one finger to the glass, wait, then angled toward the service door, already mapping routes and risks. The service door clicked softly behind him, and the lobby noise dulled to a distant hum, like pressure in his ears. He paused just long enough to feel the vibration of the elevator cables through the concrete, then kept moving. Down here, the building spoke in tremors and heat, and he understood its language better than he understood people in suits. The corridor smelled of dust and machine oil. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead, buzzing in uneven rhythms. He adjusted his grip on the toolbox, not because he needed the tools yet, but because the weight kept him grounded. Above him, Vaughn's voice barked orders, sharp and frantic, echoing through the ventilation shafts. "Lock down the floor, no one else moves." That was the problem. Lockdowns trapped everyone together and made desperation louder. He'd learned that lesson long before this job, in places he never talked about. He reached the mechanical access panel near the elevator shaft and knelt, fingers flying over screws. The panel resisted for half a second, then gave. Warm air rushed out, carrying the smell of metal and electricity. He leaned in, listening. The elevator wasn't fully stalled. It was hovering between safeties, held by protocols designed for accidents, not people with knives. His hands stilled when he heard footsteps. Vaughn appeared at the corridor's mouth, jaw tight, eyes narrowed. "What are you doing?" the security director demanded. "I told you to step away." He didn't look up. "You told me to get out of the line of fire. I did. This is above your pay grade." A faint smile tugged at his mouth, then disappeared. "Right now, pay grades don't matter. Patterns do." Vaughn scoffed. "You think you're helping? You'll get someone killed." He finally turned, meeting the man's gaze. "You already are." He's agitated. Your voice keeps spiking his adrenaline. Silence stretched between them, thick and uncomfortable. Vaughn's radio crackled with overlapping voices, legal, PR, emergency response, all talking at once, none of them solving the immediate problem. Up in the lobby, a murmur rose and fell. Phones were out now. People filmed fear when they didn't know what else to do. He turned back to the panel. The elevator's load sensor tripped. That's why it stopped where it did. Vaughn blinked. "How do you know that?" "Because if it were a hard stop, you'd hear the brakes. You didn't." He tapped the casing. "It's hovering, which means we have options." Options were power. He felt it shift subtly, the way the air changes before a storm. He climbed the narrow ladder toward the shaft's upper access, muscles tightening with the familiar burn of controlled movement. Halfway up, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He ignored it until it buzzed again, then stopped long enough to check. A message from the school's after-hours line. Lucas's teacher reminding him about tomorrow's early appointment, about trust, about being there. He closed his eyes for half, a second, and typed back a single word. Always. Then he kept climbing. From above, he could see into the elevator through the glass wall. The CEO's face was pale but focused, her hands poised, waiting for his cues. The intruder paced, breathing hard, blade shaking. Sweat darkened his hoodie. He raised his hands into view, slow and deliberate. "Look at me," he signed, "not him. Me." The CEO mirrored him instantly, relief flickering across her face like a match struck in the dark. Behind him, Vaughn muttered, "Unbelievable." "If this works," he said without turning, "I need you to do exactly what I say, no heroics." Vaughn hesitated. Authority warred with reality on his face. Finally, he nodded once. The elevator shuddered as he disengaged a secondary safety, just enough to lower it an inch. The intruder froze, eyes darting. "Stop!" Vaughn shouted before he could stop himself. The blade jerked upward. The assistant whimpered. He slammed his palm against the metal. "Quiet," he snapped, the calm cracking just enough to carry. Vaughn went silent. The intruder's breathing hitched. Confusion softened into hesitation. That hesitation mattered. He signed quickly now, precise. "He's scared. He doesn't want to hurt anyone. We can end this without blood." The CEO swallowed and nodded, trusting him with her life. The crowd gasped as the elevator moved again, barely perceptible, but real. He adjusted the controls, sweat beating at his temples. This was the line. Too much movement and panic would explode. Too little and time would run out. As he worked, he thought of Lucas's small hands, of promises kept through action, not words. If you're still with me, take a second to subscribe, because what happens next is where everything could go wrong, or finally turn right. The panel clicked. The elevator settled into a stable hold. He exhaled slowly, steadying himself for the next step. The elevator's hum evened out, a fragile truce between gravity and machinery, and the air seemed to loosen by a fraction. He stayed where he was, hands hovering over the controls, listening to the building breathe. Down below, the lobby's murmur pressed upward through the shaft, fear wrapped in curiosity, phones still raised, everyone waiting for someone else to decide what came next. Inside the car, the intruder wiped his face with the back of his sleeve, knife still up but drifting lower as adrenaline burned off. The assistant's knees trembled. She leaned subtly toward the CEO, who steadied her with a shoulder without breaking eye contact with the man above the shaft. When she lifted her hands again, they were steadier. "What do you need?" she signed. He took that in, the question carrying more weight than any spoken command. "Time," he signed back. "And quiet." Vaughn shifted behind him, boots scuffing metal. "We've got negotiators inbound," he said, voice forced into confidence. "Crisis team's 5 minutes out." 5 minutes was an eternity. 5 minutes was a lifetime when someone's grip was slipping. He didn't argue, he didn't need to. Instead, he angled his body to block Vaughn's line of sight to the intruder, a small physical barrier that meant less visual noise for the man inside. He reached into the toolbox and took out a roll of electrical tape, tearing a strip with his teeth. He wrapped it around a loose cable, securing it out of sight. The motion was mundane, almost boring. It was also deliberate. The intruder noticed. His eyes tracked the movement, curiosity cutting through panic. "What are you doing?" he shouted upward, voice cracking. "Fixing a problem," he said evenly, "same as always." "I don't want to hurt anyone," the man blurted, words tumbling over each other now that they'd started. "They took my contract. They ruined me." The CEO flinched, but kept her hands ready, translating his signs into patience, into presence. He leaned closer to the shaft opening. "I hear you," he said. "Right now, hurting someone won't fix that." Silence stretched. The blade dipped another inch. From somewhere deep in the building, an alarm began to chirp, then died abruptly. Vaughn swore under his breath. Systems are glitching, we're losing redundancy. Because they weren't maintained, he said quietly, eyes never leaving the intruder. Because nobody thinks about worse days. A memory flickered. Another confined space, another man shaking, another moment where shouting would have killed everyone. He pushed it down. This wasn't then, this was now. He signed to the CEO again. When he talks about the contract, ask him his name. She nodded and did it, her movements calm, inviting. The intruder hesitated, then answered, voice rough. Giving his name seemed to anchor him, like saying it made him real again. Good, he murmured. Names matter. The assistant's breathing slowed. The knife wavered. Behind him, Vaughn's radio buzzed. Media's outside, a voice said. This is going live. Vaughn stiffened. We need to end this. He turned just enough to catch the director's eye. We need to end this right. For a moment, Vaughn looked like he might argue. Then he looked at the glass, at the CEO's face, at the intruder's shaking hands, and something in him recalibrated. He nodded, sharp and quick. Talk me through it, Vaughn said. That was new, that was movement. He outlined the next steps in low tones. How to keep the car stable. How to avoid sudden light changes. How to let the intruder believe he still had control long enough to give it up. Vaughn listened, really listened, and relayed instructions without adding his own spin. Inside the elevator, the CEO followed every cue, her trust absolute now. When the intruder sagged against the wall, exhaustion overtaking anger, she didn't recoil. She stayed where she was, human and unarmed. Put the knife down, he said softly. You've been heard. The man's fingers loosened. Metal clattered against the floor, loud as a gunshot in the enclosed space. A collective gasp rippled through the lobby. Don't move yet, he said quickly, holding the moment steady. He secured the controls, then moved with care down the ladder, boots finding rungs by memory. When he stepped back into the lobby's light, the contrast hit him. The polished floor, the crowd's parted sea, the weight of eyes. He approached the elevator as doors slid open inch by inch. Security moved in, careful now, measured. The intruder was taken without a struggle. The assistant collapsed into sobs. The CEO stayed upright, hands trembling only when it was over. As the adrenaline drained, his phone buzzed again in his pocket. He didn't check it yet. He watched as lives resumed motion, as the chaos softened into aftermath. Vaughn exhaled hard. Who are you? He asked, not accusatory now, genuinely unsure. He considered the question, then answered simply, maintenance. And for the first time that night, nobody laughed. The lobby didn't erupt into cheers. It sagged into a stunned quiet. The kind that follows a near miss when everyone realizes how close they came. Phones lowered. Breaths were released. He felt the aftershock in his hands, a faint tremor he kept hidden by curling his fingers around the toolbox handle. Security guided the intruder away, careful, almost gentle now. No cuffs clicked yet. The assistant leaned against the glass and slid down until she was sitting, crying into her palms. The CEO watched it all, shoulders squared, eyes tracking every movement as if committing them to memory. Vaughn cleared his throat, the sound too loud in the quiet. We'll take it from here, he said, voice softer than before. He waited for pushback that didn't come. He nodded once, a small acknowledgement, and stepped back toward the service corridor. Not retreat, relinquishing space. It was his habit after crises to fade before attention hardened into questions. Questions were already forming, though. He felt them prickling at his back as he moved. Why did maintenance know sign language? Why had he spoken like someone used to command without volume? The CEO broke away from security and crossed the few steps toward him. Up close, the Polish cracked. Exhaustion etched lines at the corners of her eyes. She stopped at a respectful distance. "Thank you," she said simply. No speech, no branding, just gratitude, raw and unfiltered. He inclined his head, uncomfortable with the focus. "I'm glad everyone's safe." Her gaze dropped to his hands, still faintly shaking, then lifted back to his face. "You sign fluently," she said, "not a question." "My son's deaf." It was the truth that required the least explanation. Something shifted in her expression, a recalibration. She nodded, once, mirroring him. Behind them, executives whispered, the sound sharp with self-reproach and fear of what might follow. Legal counsel hovered. PR typed furiously. Vaughn returned, posture altered, less rigid. "Police are taking statements," he said. "They'll want yours." He exhaled, slow. Statements meant timelines. Timelines meant history. History was the thing he'd boxed up for Lucas's sake. The CEO seemed to sense it. "We can talk later," she said, "when it's quieter." He appreciated the out. "I need to get back to work," he replied, gesturing at the open panel and exposed wiring. It was absurd, but it grounded him. Normal tasks after abnormal events. He moved away as medics swept in. The CEO watched him go, unreadable. In the service corridor, the fluorescent buzz returned. He leaned against the wall and let the tremor come. His phone buzzed. He checked it now. A photo from Lucas, sent by the babysitter. Homework finished, a crooked thumbs up. He smiled despite himself. Promise kept for tonight. Footsteps approached. Vaughn stopped beside him, not quite meeting his eyes. "You should know," he said. "This building exists because people like you keep it standing." He considered the words. They felt new. From the lobby came the sound of sirens and cameras. Consequences arriving. He straightened, squared his shoulders. Whatever came next would test whether tonight changed anything at all. He closed the panel carefully, tightening screws until the casing sat flush. The small order came to him. Overhead, the elevator lights brightened as power normalized. The building healed itself, piece by piece. He packed the tape back into the toolbox, noting how ordinary it looked. Ordinary things saved people more often than anyone admitted. Vaughn lingered. So did the question neither of them asked. He hoisted the toolbox and started down the corridor, the night not finished yet. Somewhere above, a company would decide what story to tell. He knew stories had weight. They shaped who was seen and who stayed invisible. Tonight, invisibility had cracked. Tomorrow would reveal whether it shattered. He turned a corner and nearly collided with the CEO's chief of staff, who stopped short. Apologies were exchanged, hurried and brittle. As they passed, he caught his reflection in a polished steel door. The uniform, the tired eyes, the steadiness. It was all of him now. Past folded into present. Present pointed toward something uncertain. His phone vibrated again with a calendar reminder for morning. He silenced it and kept walking. The corridor opened toward the maintenance bay, tools neatly lined, work waiting. He set the toolbox down and rolled his shoulders. Outside, sirens faded. Inside, the building returned to its rhythms. He took a breath and stepped back into the job, ready for whatever questions daylight might bring. For now, he chose work over worry, motion over memory, and the quiet promise of coming home. The night had asked for steadiness. He had answered. And somewhere above, lives resumed because someone ordinary refused to panic. That truth would echo long after the cameras stopped recording the night entirely. The police lights painted the lobby in alternating blue and red, washing over marble and glass until the building looked bruised. He watched it from the maintenance bay doorway, half in shadow, half in the glare, feeling the strange dislocation that followed crisis. The world looked the same, but he wasn't standing in it the same way. An officer approached, notebook in hand. Questions came measured and procedural. Where were you standing? What did you touch? How did you know what to do? He answered simply, sticking to the present tense, careful not to wander into old muscle memory or older titles. Maintenance background. Son is deaf. Learned to sign. Building systems knowledge. Enough truth to satisfy, not enough to invite excavation. When the officer left, Vaughn stepped into his place. The security director looked wrung out, the bravado gone, replaced by something closer to thoughtfulness. "You should have been in that briefing room," he said quietly. Half the people in there froze. "Freezing's human," he replied. "Staying frozen's a choice." Vaughn nodded, absorbing it. "They're asking for you." He followed the gesture toward the lobby, where the CEO stood near a temporary command table, jacket draped over a chair, sleeves rolled up. She wasn't directing anymore, she was listening. To police, to medics, to staff who'd been shaken by how close tonight came. When she noticed him, she broke away without hesitation. "I want you there," she said, not as an order, but a request. "When we review what happened." He hesitated. Being there meant daylight. Daylight meant scrutiny. He thought of Lucas's calendar reminder, of how fragile normal was. "I don't usually, I know," she said gently. But tonight wasn't usual. The briefing room was all glass and steel, a place designed for power to feel comfortable. He took a seat near the end of the table, toolbox still at his feet, an out-of-place artifact among tablets and tailored suits. Conversations dipped when he entered, then resumed, cautious. They reviewed timelines, the ignored maintenance report about the service gate, the delayed alarm, the protocol that trapped people instead of protecting them. Each failure stacked neatly, undeniable. When they reached the elevator segment, all eyes shifted to him. "Explain," someone said. He did, calmly, no dramatics, just cause and effect. Panic and noise escalate. Silence creates space. Systems aren't villains. Neglect is. The CEO listened without interruption. When he finished, she turned to the table. "This building failed because we assumed money equaled safety," she said. "It doesn't." No one argued. After, as the room thinned, she lingered. "You didn't have to stay," she said. "You could have walked away." He shrugged. Someone had to stay. She studied him, really studied him, not as a role, but as a person. "What did this job mean to you before tonight?" He considered. "It meant I could pick my son up in the mornings." Her expression softened. "And after tonight?" "That depends," he said honestly. She nodded. "It shouldn't." Outside the room, the last of the media were being ushered out. The story was already forming, simplified, sharpened. Hero maintenance worker saves CEO. He knew how stories worked. They took what they needed and left the rest. Vaughn caught up to him near the elevators. "You changed how I see this place," he admitted. "How I do my job." "That's up to you," he replied. "Change sticks when it's inconvenient." Vaughn huffed a quiet laugh. "You're not wrong." The night thinned toward morning. He clocked out late, exhaustion settling deep into his bones. Outside, the city felt washed clean, damp with early dawn. On the bus ride home, he finally let himself breathe. The adrenaline faded, leaving behind ache and a strange lightness. He checked his phone. A new message from Lucas, voice to text clumsy but earnest. "Love you, Dad. You coming home?" "Always," he typed back. If you're still here, take a second to subscribe, because what comes after the crisis is where real change gets tested. At home, he moved quietly, careful not to wake the boy. He paused in the doorway, watching Lucas sleep, hands curled loosely as if still signing in dreams. The sight anchored him. Morning came too soon. News alerts buzzed. His name wasn't mentioned yet, just his role. Maintenance worker, single dad, it was enough. When he dropped Lucas at school, the teacher thanked him again for being flexible. He nodded, unaware of the shift already underway elsewhere. Back at the tower, executives gathered earlier than usual. Policies were being rewritten, budgets re-examined, maintenance reports resurfaced, this time. He walked past the lobby, unnoticed again by some, but not all. A few heads nodded. A few eyes followed with new respect. The CEO crossed paths with him near the elevators. No entourage this time. She stopped. "We'll talk," she said, "about what comes next." He met her gaze, steady. "As long as it helps the right people." She smiled, small and genuine. "That's the point." He continued on, toolbox in hand, returning to the places power rarely looked. But now, those places felt different, charged with the knowledge that when systems failed, someone had seen him stand. The victory wasn't applause, it was leverage. And it was only beginning. The leverage settled slowly, like weight redistributing across a bridge. He felt it the moment he stepped back into the maintenance wing and found his inbox flagged, requests marked urgent, not ignored. The building hadn't changed overnight, but the way people moved through it had. Voices lowered when they passed him. Doors opened without irritation. Small things, but they carried meaning. He started his shift the same way he always did, walking the perimeter, listening for irregular sounds. The hum of generators, the click of relays, the faint rattle in a duct that told him a bracket was loosening. Routine anchored him, even as attention tugged from every direction. By mid-morning, Vaughn appeared again, this time without a radio clenched in his hand. "Facilities reviews happening upstairs," he said. "They want your input." "On maintenance logs?" he asked. "On reality," Vaughn replied, "specifically how close we came to losing control." That phrasing mattered. Losing control. Not optics, not liability, control. They walked together toward the executive floors. Elevators glided smoothly now, polished and obedient, as if trying to atone. When the doors opened, conversation paused. The room held a long table, glass walls, and a screen filled with diagrams of the building's systems, his systems, finally magnified. He took a seat near the edge again. It felt intentional now, a position chosen rather than assigned. The CEO entered last, carrying a slim folder instead of a tablet. She nodded to him, brief but direct, then addressed the room. "We're here to talk about failure," she said. "Ours." No one interrupted. They walked through scenarios. Power loss, access breaches, human error. When questions turned theoretical, he brought them back to specifics. What happens when alarms overlap? How people behave when trapped? Why rigid scripts break under stress? A senior executive frowned. "We have protocols for that." "Yes," he said, "you have protocols for perfect conditions." Silence followed. Then notes were taken. As the meeting stretched on, the distance between titles narrowed. He noticed it in the way questions were asked, not challenges, but curiosity. He wasn't defending a position. He was explaining a truth they'd never needed to know before. After, the CEO asked him to stay. The room emptied, leaving sunlight and the quiet whir of climate control. "You avoided questions last night," she said, not accusing, "about how you knew what to do." He met her gaze. "Because the answer doesn't change what needs fixing." She considered that. "Humor me." He waited, then nodded. "I had training. A long time ago, it taught me how fear moves." "Military?" she asked. "Yes." He didn't elaborate. She didn't press. "You left." "For my son." That, she understood. He saw it in the way her posture softened, the way the conversation shifted from interrogation to alignment. "I'm restructuring security," she said, "and facilities, not as separate silos." "Good," he replied. "They fail together." She smiled. "I want you involved." He felt the old instinct to refuse, rise up. Visibility was risk, but he pushed it aside. This wasn't about him anymore. "As long as it's not symbolic." "It won't be," she said. "It can't be." Word spread quickly. Maintenance crews were looped into planning meetings. Reports were read aloud. The service gate he'd flagged was repaired within hours. It wasn't redemption, but it was response. Still, not everyone welcomed the shift. A few managers bristled, their authority thinned by the presence of someone they'd never considered equal. He felt it in sideways looks, in questions framed to test rather than learn. One afternoon, as he logged repairs near the elevator bank, a manager snapped, "We didn't hire you to redesign policy." He straightened slowly. "You didn't hire me to save lives either." The manager flushed and walked away. Vaughn, nearby, didn't hide his smile. At home, Lucas noticed the change before anyone else. "You're tired different," he signed, brow furrowed. "Different how?" "Like after you fix something big." He laughed softly. "Maybe I did." Lucas nodded, satisfied, then went back to his homework. The following day, a drill was announced, unplanned, unscripted. The building reacted unevenly, nerves exposed. He moved through it quietly, correcting course, steadying hands. The CEO watched from the control room, not interfering. When it ended, she exhaled. "We have work to do." "Yes," he agreed, "but now you're listening." That was the bond forged by crisis, not gratitude, but trust earned under pressure. As evening fell, he returned to the maintenance wing, logging the day's changes. The building felt different under his hands, less hostile, more honest. He knew better than to think one night fixed everything. Systems drift, people forget, but leverage, once applied, leaves marks. He packed up his tools, the ordinary weight familiar again, and headed toward the exit. Tomorrow would bring resistance, and questions, and choices. But tonight he walked out knowing the crisis hadn't ended. It had evolved. And this time, he wouldn't be standing alone. He stepped out into the evening air with the sense that something unseen had shifted its footing. The city sounded the same. Traffic hissing past, distant sirens threading the dark, but his internal compass had rotated. He wasn't leaving behind a solved problem. He was leaving behind an opening. The next morning, tested it. He arrived early, coffee cooling in his hand, and found the maintenance board crowded with new work orders flagged as critical. Not the usual backlog ignored until something broke, but real attention. He scanned them, noted patterns, and started assigning tasks before anyone asked him to. It wasn't authority he was claiming, just momentum. Some of the crew noticed. Others didn't like it. A senior supervisor cornered him near the supply cage, voice low. "Careful," the man warned. "People upstairs don't like lines crossed." He met the gaze calmly. "I didn't draw the lines." The supervisor snorted and walked away, but the warning lingered. Change always created friction. He'd seen that too. By midday, Vaughn called him into the control room. Monitors lined the walls, feeds cycling through elevators, lobbies, access points. The room smelled faintly of ozone and stress. "We've got an issue," Vaughn said. "Not a crisis. Yet." That word, yet, mattered. They watched a replay. A delivery contractor slipping through a restricted stairwell during a shift change. No weapon, no overt threat, just a hole in the system. "Protocol says flag it, document it, move on," Vaughn said. "But after last night, you don't wait," he finished. "You close the gap." Vaughn nodded. "Thought you'd say that." They walked the stairwell together, metal steps echoing underfoot. He pointed out blind spots, places where sound carried poorly, where fear would spike if someone felt trapped. He didn't talk about what happened in similar stairwells years ago. He didn't need to. As they worked, word filtered down that the CEO was touring facilities unannounced. Not a photo op, no entourage, no press, just her and a notepad. She found them in the stairwell, heels swapped for flats, jacket gone. She listened as he explained why the contractor incident mattered, why near misses were warnings, not footnotes. "I want this fixed today," she said. "It will be," he replied. And it was. By late afternoon, new access controls were live, not flashy, functional. He watched crews test them, listened to feedback, adjusted on the fly. The building responded like a living thing, healthier for the care. Still, resistance simmered. In a meeting meant to review progress, a department head pushed back hard. "We're overcorrecting," she argued. "One incident doesn't justify restructuring." He felt the familiar tightening, the urge to withdraw. Instead, he stayed present. "It wasn't one incident," he said. "It was a pattern that finally got noticed." The room stilled. Eyes shifted to the CEO. She didn't hesitate. "He's right," she said, "and ignoring patterns is how we ended up here." That was the moment he felt the bond solidify. Not loyalty, but alignment. After the meeting, he retreated to the maintenance wing, needing the comfort of work that didn't debate its own necessity. He replaced a worn belt, tightened a loose bracket, logged changes with care. The physicality grounded him. His phone buzzed. A message from Lucas's teacher, thanking him for volunteering to help translate at the next school event. He smiled, warmth cutting through the tension. Later, as dusk settled, he found himself back at the elevator bank where it had all started. The glass gleamed, pristine, betraying nothing of fear. He rested a hand against the cool surface, feeling the faint vibration of movement within. Footsteps approached. The CEO stopped beside him, gaze following his hand. "It doesn't look like anything happened," she said. "Buildings are good at hiding scars," he replied. "People too." She glanced at him. "You didn't want this kind of attention." "No," he admitted, "but I wanted the work to matter." "It does," she said, "and it will." They stood in silence for a moment, the elevator doors sliding open and closed, carrying ordinary lives up and down. As she walked away, he felt neither relief nor triumph. What he felt was responsibility. Change wasn't a single act, it was maintenance. Constant, unglamorous, necessary. He gathered his tools and headed toward the exit, the day's wait settling in. Tomorrow would bring new tests. Pushback, fatigue, but tonight the system held, and that was enough to keep going. He pushed through the revolving doors and into the cooling night, shoulders heavy but mind alert. The city lights flickered against the glass behind him, reflections stacking until it felt like multiple versions of the building were watching him leave. He paused on the steps, breathing in the damp air, then checked his phone. A voicemail from an unknown number waited. He didn't open it yet. The bus ride home was quiet, filled with people staring through windows instead of at one another. He took the seat near the back, toolbox between his boots, and let the motion smooth the edges of the day. Responsibility had weight, but it also had direction. That mattered. At home, Lucas met him at the door in socks, already signing before words could get in the way. "You were late. Are you okay?" "I'm okay," he signed back, kneeling to be level with him. "Just fixing things." Lucas studied his face, then nodded, satisfied. He took his father's hand and pulled him toward the kitchen, where a half-finished drawing waited on the table. It showed a tall building, a small figure near the bottom, and a big heart drawn around both. He swallowed. "That's us?" Lucas grinned. Always. Later, after homework and bedtime routines, he sat alone at the table and finally played the voicemail. A calm voice identified itself as an external consultant hired by the company. Risk assessment, infrastructure resilience. They wanted to talk. Not about praise, about preparation. The next day, the preparation began in earnest. He stood in the service tunnel with a small group. Maintenance leads, security supervisors, one engineer from outside, mapping worst-case scenarios on a whiteboard propped against a pipe. Fire, power failure, active threat, flooding. Each scenario branched into decisions, each decision into consequences. "What if alarms fail?" someone asked. "Then people panic," he said. "So you design for calm without them." They tested routes, timed evacuations, simulated failures. Not once did anyone ask him to step aside. The work spoke for itself. The CEO stopped by briefly, observing without interrupting. When she left, she met his eyes and gave a single nod. Approval without theater. Resistance flared again in smaller ways. Emails questioning scope. Budget concerns disguised as prudence. He answered them all with data and lived experience, never raising his voice. Patterns again, evidence again. By the end of the week, a full-scale drill was scheduled. Not announced to executives first. Announced to everyone. The morning of the drill, tension crackled through the building. He moved between floors, checking stations, grounding nerves with presence. Vaughn stayed close, no longer directing, coordinating instead. When the simulated failure hit, lights dropping, alarms misfiring on purpose, the building staggered, then adapted. People followed guidance. Stairwells flowed instead of clogged. The system bent but didn't break. From the control room, the CEO watched it unfold. This time, she didn't clutch anything. When it ended, applause broke out spontaneously on the lobby floor. Not for a person, for survival rehearsed. He stood near the edge, hands in pockets, letting it pass. If you're finding something meaningful in this story, subscribe now, because what comes next is where preparation turns into proof. After, the consultant pulled him aside. "You ever consider formalizing this?" she asked. "Training others." He thought of Lucas's drawing, of maintenance logs finally read, of systems that remembered what they were for. "I consider what keeps people safe," he said. "Titles come after." That evening, the CEO called him into her office, not the boardroom, a smaller space, windows that opened. "I'm creating a new role," she said, "one that bridges what we missed." He listened, asked questions, set boundaries, made sure it wouldn't pull him away from mornings. "It won't," she said, "I promise." Promises mattered. He nodded. They shook hands, equal height, equal weight. When he left, the building felt quieter, steadier, not perfect, maintained. At home, Lucas waited up, pretending not to be sleepy. "Did you fix it?" He signed. "We're fixing it," he corrected gently. Lucas smiled. "Good." He tucked the boy in, lingered at the doorway, then turned off the light. Outside, the city hummed on. Inside, plans were laid not for glory, but for the next time fear knocked. And next time, the system would answer. Morning came softer than expected. No alarms, no urgent calls, just sunlight slipping through the kitchen blinds and the quiet clatter of a spoon against a bowl. He stood at the counter tying Lucas's lunch bag, the ordinary rhythm grounding him more than sleep ever could. Responsibility had followed him home, but it didn't feel invasive. It felt integrated. At the tower, preparation shifted into structure. He walked into a room that used to be reserved for senior planning. Now repurposed, chairs rearranged in a circle instead of a hierarchy. Maintenance leads, security supervisors, facilities engineers, and 2 representatives from HR sat together, coffee cups in hand, waiting. That alone told him something had changed. He didn't take the head seat. He never did. "We're here to stress test people, not paperwork," he began, voice steady, "because emergencies don't care about titles." No one disagreed. They ran scenarios again, this time focusing on decision fatigue. What happened after the first 10 minutes, after adrenaline wore off? He watched faces as he spoke, noted where confidence dipped, where assumptions crept in. He adjusted the plan in real time, redirecting conversations before they hardened into dogma. Midway through, resistance surfaced, not loud, but persistent. A regional director leaned back, arms crossed. "This is thorough," she said carefully, "but it's also resource-heavy. We can't operate like every day is a crisis." He nodded. "You're right. You operate like crises are rare. That's the risk." The room stilled. He let the silence do its work. "Preparation isn't living in fear," he continued. "It's living without surprise." That landed. After the meeting, Vaughn walked with him down the corridor, quieter than usual. "You realize you're changing how decisions get made here." "I'm just making consequences visible." Vaughn exhaled. "That's more disruptive than it sounds." By afternoon, the building buzzed with unfamiliar energy. New signage went up, clear, human language instead of legal disclaimers. Stairwell lighting was adjusted to reduce glare and shadow. Small things, but layered. He spent an hour with the elevator technicians, redesigning manual overrides so they were intuitive under stress. Muscle memory mattered. He watched them test the changes, correcting posture, pacing, breath. "This is different," one of them said. "Feels like you've done this before." He met the man's eyes briefly. "I've learned from mistakes." That was enough. Late in the day, the CEO joined him in the service corridor, not for inspection but observation. She watched as he coached a junior tech through a fault simulation, calm and precise. "You're preparing them to think," she said. "Yes," he replied, "not to wait." She leaned against the wall, considering. "That's the part money can't buy, isn't it?" He smiled faintly. "Not directly." A message came through from the consultant. A regional audit team would arrive the following week. External eyes, pressure. At home, Lucas sensed it before he said anything. "You're thinking hard," he signed, brow creased. "Work stuff," he admitted. Lucas nodded solemnly, then signed back with exaggerated seriousness. "Don't forget dinner." He laughed, tension easing. "I won't." That night, after Lucas slept, he reviewed plans at the kitchen table, papers spread among crayons and homework sheets. The juxtaposition felt right, systems and futures sharing space. He caught himself imagining worst-case scenarios again, then deliberately pulled back. Preparation had limits. Obsession eroded clarity. The next day delivered the first real test. A transformer failure downtown knocked out power to several blocks, including part of the tower's grid. Backup systems kicked in, but the transition wasn't clean. Lights flickered, elevators paused. He was already moving when the call came, coordination automatic. He took the stairwell 2 at a time, radio clipped but unused. His voice carried better in person. On the affected floors, anxiety rippled. He anchored it with presence, directing calmly, deploying teams where they'd practiced. The new signage helped. The training held. In the control room, the CEO watched the feeds, hands relaxed at her sides. Within minutes, power stabilized. No injuries, no panic. After, the audit team arrived earlier than expected, catching the building mid-recovery. They saw process, not chaos. Adaptation, not scramble. One of them pulled him aside. "You turned a failure into a demonstration," she said. He shrugged. "We rehearsed." She smiled. "Most don't." As the day wound down, he felt the weight lift slightly. Preparation had proven itself, not in perfection, but in resilience. He stepped outside as dusk settled, city lights blinking on like steady heartbeats. Tomorrow would bring reports, revisions, maybe pushback. But tonight, the system had bent and held. He checked his phone. A message from Lucas, sent from the babysitter's phone. "Can we have pancakes tomorrow?" He typed back without hesitation. Always. And for the first time since the elevator stopped, he allowed himself to believe it. The audit report landed like a held breath finally released. He read it standing up, back against the maintenance bay wall, the pages warm from the printer. The language was formal, restrained, but the conclusions were clear. The building's response to the outage had exceeded expectations. Preparation had turned a potential incident into a controlled event. He closed the report and exhaled slowly. By mid-morning, the CEO called for an all-hands briefing in the atrium. Not mandatory, not branded. Just an invitation. Employees gathered in clusters, maintenance beside managers, assistants beside executives, an arrangement that would have felt unthinkable weeks ago. He stood off to the side, hands in his pockets, listening as she spoke. She didn't dramatize the past. She focused on the future, on systems that respected people, on the fact that safety wasn't a department, it was a culture. When she finished, applause rose again, softer this time, more sustained. Not relief, recognition. Her eyes found him across the space. She nodded once. Afterward, people approached in 2s and 3s, quiet thanks, questions. A few apologies that mattered because they weren't performative. He accepted them all with the same calm he'd used in the shaft, careful not to let any single moment swell too large. Vaughn joined him near the edge of the crowd. "You know," the director said, "this place used to run on fear of liability." "And now?" he asked. "Now it runs on responsibility," Vaughn replied. "It's uncomfortable, but it works." Later that afternoon, the CEO asked him into her office again. Sunlight poured in through open windows, the city's noise softened by distance. "The board approved the role," she said, sliding a folder across the desk. "Facilities resilience lead, reporting directly to me." He didn't open it yet. "And the schedule?" "Flexible," she answered immediately. "Mornings stay yours." That mattered more than the title. He nodded. "Then yes." She smiled, genuine. "You earned this." He finally opened the folder. The compensation was fair, not extravagant. Enough. The responsibilities were clear, grounded in reality, not optics. He closed it and met her gaze. "This only works if we keep listening." "We will," she said. "You made sure of that." The news spread quickly. Some celebrated. Others bristled. He felt the undercurrent but didn't let it slow him. Change didn't require universal approval. It required persistence. That evening, he picked Lucas up from school himself earlier than usual. The boy ran to him, signing excitedly before words could form. "You're early." "New schedule," he signed back. "Means more dinners together." Lucas beamed, then paused. "Did you save anyone today?" He considered the question. "Not like before," he answered, "but we made things safer." Lucas nodded solemnly, accepting that as the highest form of heroism. At home, they cooked together, flour on the counter, laughter filling the small kitchen. Normalcy, reclaimed inch by inch. Later, after Lucas slept, he sat at the table again, not with plans this time, but with the quiet awareness that the crisis had truly ended. The knife was gone. The elevator moved freely, the system had adapted. But endings weren't conclusions. They were transitions. The next week brought new challenges. Budget debates, training fatigue, the slow creep of complacency he watched for relentlessly. He countered it with reminders, drills, conversations that kept consequences visible. One afternoon, he caught himself in the elevator, reflection mirrored back at him. Same uniform, same tired eyes, but something steadier beneath them. He belonged in both worlds now, not as a bridge to be walked over, but as a load-bearing structure. The CEO joined him unexpectedly, no assistance in sight. The elevator hummed smoothly. "Do you ever miss anonymity?" she asked. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but I don't miss being ignored." She smiled. Neither should anyone. When the doors opened, they went their separate ways, equal in the shared understanding that trust was built daily or lost overnight. That night, as he tucked Lucas in, the boy signed slowly, deliberately. "You didn't leave." He swallowed. "I won't." Lucas smiled sleepily and turned over, satisfied. He stood in the doorway a moment longer, listening to the even rhythm of his son's breathing. The promise felt lighter now, not because it mattered less, but because it had room to breathe. Outside, the city carried on. Inside, systems held. The crisis had revealed what mattered. Preparation had preserved it. And tomorrow he would show up again, not to save the day, but to maintain it. The weeks that followed didn't slow so much as settle into a different rhythm. Not the frantic pulse of crisis, but the steady cadence of systems being tested, corrected, and tested again. He learned quickly that success attracted scrutiny just as failure did, only quieter and more persistent. Emails arrived from regional offices asking for frameworks. Other buildings wanted to replicate what had happened here, to bottle the effect without always understanding the cause. He answered when it made sense and declined when it didn't, careful not to let momentum turn into spectacle. Safety lost its meaning when it became performative. One afternoon, he found a printed article left on the maintenance table. A feature piece, tasteful but incomplete. It mentioned a night shift maintenance worker who'd helped de-escalate a hostage situation. No name, no past. Just enough truth to make the point without inviting mythology. He folded it once and set it aside. Vaughn stopped by later, coffee in hand, posture relaxed in a way it hadn't been before. "People are asking about you," he said. "Not the gossip kind, the real kind." He nodded. "They can ask." "They're also pushing back," Vaughn added. "Some don't like that the playbook changed." "Then they're reading it," he replied. "That's a start." The CEO's presence shifted too. She was visible in places she hadn't been. Stairwell, service corridors, break rooms, listening more than speaking. It didn't fix everything, but it set a tone that made dismissal harder. During one walk-through, a junior cleaner spoke up about a broken lock she'd reported 3 times. It was fixed within the hour. The look on her face lingered with him longer than any boardroom approval. At home, Lucas noticed the changes in smaller ways. Breakfasts were unhurried. Evenings weren't rushed. He signed stories about school, about friends learning his language, about how he'd taught his class a new sign. They wanted to know how, Lucas signed, proud. So I showed them. He smiled. You did good. No, Lucas corrected, signing carefully. We did. That distinction mattered. The past surfaced unexpectedly one evening, not as accusation, but as acknowledgement. A man from a government office called, referencing old service records now visible through background checks. The tone was neutral, respectful. You left clean, the man said. No one ever followed up. I didn't want it followed up, he replied. The man understood. Just wanted you to know it mattered then. It still does. After the call, he sat quietly for a long time, letting the weight of that era settle without reopening. Some chapters didn't need revisiting to remain true. At work, the final piece of the restructuring clicked into place. A cross-training program that paired security, maintenance, and administrative staff. Not to blur roles, but to humanize them. Faces replaced titles. Names replaced assumptions. During the first session, someone asked why he cared so much. He answered without hesitation. Because systems fail where people feel unseen. The room went quiet, then thoughtful. Late one night, he found himself back in the lobby alone, lights dimmed, the building at rest. He stood before the elevator, watching his reflection warp in the glass. The memory surfaced again, the knife, the hand signing, the moment time slowed to a thread. He didn't flinch from it anymore. Footsteps echoed behind him. The CEO joined him, unannounced as usual. I wanted to say something, she said, off the record. He waited. I was raised to believe control was the same as leadership, she continued. You showed me it isn't. He nodded. Control breaks under pressure. And trust? She asked. Trust flexes, he said, if you maintain it. She smiled, small and sincere. Thank you. They stood there a moment longer, then parted, each returning to their own responsibilities. At home, Lucas was already asleep, homework tucked neatly away. He adjusted the blanket, careful not to wake him. The boy stirred anyway, eyes opening just enough. You okay? Lucas signed sleepily. Yes, he signed back. Are you? Lucas nodded and closed his eyes again. He lingered, hand resting lightly on the doorframe, feeling the quiet settle around him. Not the absence of noise, but the presence of peace earned through effort. Tomorrow would bring more meetings, more resistance, more chances to forget the lessons learned under pressure. He would counter them the same way he always had: attention, patience, maintenance. The story others told might simplify what happened, compress it into a single night, a single act. He knew better. Real change wasn't dramatic. It was sustained. He turned off the light and went to bed, ready to wake up and do the work again. Because dignity, like safety, wasn't a moment. It was a practice. Morning light filtered through the apartment, softer than it used to feel. He moved quietly through the kitchen, making pancakes just the way Lucas liked them, edges crisp, centers warm. The boy shuffled in, hair wild, eyes still half asleep, then smiled when he saw the plate. Promise kept, Lucas signed, pleased. Always, he replied, and meant it in the deepest way possible. At the tower later that day, there was no ceremony waiting for him, no applause, just work. And that, he'd learned, was the real marker of change. Systems that endured didn't rely on constant reminders of why they mattered. They simply functioned better because someone cared enough to maintain them. He walked the floors, checked reports, paused to listen when people spoke. A junior assistant asked a question without fear of being dismissed. A cleaner flagged a door that didn't latch properly and watched it get fixed before lunch. These were the victories no camera captured. The CEO passed him in the stairwell, carrying her own coffee. They exchanged a nod. Nothing more was needed. The hierarchy still existed, but it no longer suffocated the spaces between. By midday, the building settled into its new rhythm, not perfect, not immune to failure, but alert, human, ready. He found himself back near the elevators one last time that afternoon, standing alone with the soft hum of motion behind the glass. The memory surfaced again, the knife, the fear, the moment when hands spelled out help and he answered without hesitation. It no longer felt sharp. It felt instructive. Crises didn't create character. They revealed it. When his shift ended, he left early enough to walk Lucas home from school. They moved side by side, the city loud around them, the boy's hand warm in his. Lucas chattered in signs about his day, about a classmate who'd learned a new word, about a teacher who'd finally slowed down to make sure everyone understood. "You helped them," Lucas signed. "We helped each other," he corrected gently. That night, after homework and dishes, they sat on the couch together. Lucas leaned against him, drawing shapes in the air, content. He watched the rise and fall of the boy's chest and felt something settle inside himself, an ease that had been absent for a long time. Later, alone again, he thought about how easily this could have gone differently, how close fear had come to taking something it couldn't give back, how often people like him stood in places power never looked, carrying skills no one asked about until it was too late. He didn't resent that anymore. Resentment wasted energy better spent on upkeep. The building would face another emergency someday. So would the city, so would the world. That wasn't pessimism, it was realism. The difference now was readiness and respect for the people who made it possible. He turned off the lights and headed to bed, knowing tomorrow would be ordinary, and knowing that ordinary, when protected, was extraordinary enough. Before you go, ask me for the next story title you want to hear. Subscribe and don't miss our next story. Wrong seat, wrong moment, sir. Single dad stood up. Calmly, the billionaire CEO froze. Trust me, you'll feel it. And tell me in the comments, what injustice should we tackle next? They laughed when the maintenance worker tried to speak in the executive corridor. Someone muttered, loud enough for him to hear. The woman in the tailored suit held up his worn watch like it was a punchline, reminding him he'd already begged once when he sold it. By the way, where are you watching from? Tell me in the comments below. He didn't argue. He didn't flinch. He simply nodded and stepped back into the service hallway where power never looks. What none of them understood was that his silence wasn't weakness. It was discipline forged long before this glass tower ever existed. And when the entire building would begin to fail, the same hands they mocked would be the only hands steady enough to stop it. Beneath the surface, this wasn't about a watch at all. It was about what a father gives up when no one's watching. Caleb Armin stood alone after the laughter faded, the echo of polished shoes retreating across marble. He adjusted the strap of his tool bag on his shoulder as if nothing inside him had shifted. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Calm settled over him the way it always did, slow, deliberate, controlled. He had learned long ago that humiliation only has power if you accept it. He moved down the narrow corridor toward the maintenance elevator, boots quiet against industrial flooring. The scent of cleaning solvent mixed with the faint metallic tang of recycled air. On the executive side of the wall, conversations floated in low, confident tones about quarterly gains and expansion forecasts. On this side, pipes rattled and cables pulsed unseen. Hours earlier, he had stood in a small strip mall watch shop, fluorescent bulbs flickering above a glass case of second-hand jewelry. The watch had rested in his palm, heavier than it should have been. His father's watch. Scratched crystal. Worn leather band. A lifetime of ticking memory. Lena's robotics trip invoice had sat folded in his jacket pocket, the final payment circled in red. "You sure?" the shop owner had asked. Caleb had swallowed once. Yeah, she earned it. The buyer who finalized the purchase hadn't looked sentimental. She'd inspected the watch clinically, assessed its resale value, then transferred the funds without ceremony. He hadn't known then that the same woman would be waiting for him at the top of the corporate hierarchy days later. Now in the present, the maintenance elevator doors slid open with a tired groan. He stepped inside, pressing the button for the sublevel where mechanical systems breathed and groaned beneath polished floors. The descent felt symbolic, like slipping beneath the surface of a frozen lake. Above him, sunlight streamed through panoramic windows. Down here, the air was cooler, denser. His phone vibrated in his pocket. Lena's name lit up the screen. "Hey, Bug," he answered softly. "Dad, they sent the itinerary. We're really going. I mean, if it's still okay." He leaned back against the steel wall, closing his eyes briefly. "It's okay. You worked for this. You didn't have to sell anything else, right?" A pause. He could almost see her biting her lip the way she did when she sensed more than he said. "No," he replied. "Stead, everything's handled." She exhaled, relief crackling through the speaker. "I'll make you proud, you already do." When the call ended, the silence felt thicker. He stared at his bare wrist for a moment, the absence noticeable. Then he pushed off the wall and stepped out into the mechanical level. Rows of servers and backup generators stretched in dim lines, red and green indicator lights blinking like distant stars. The low thrum of equipment vibrated through the soles of his boots. He set his bag down beside an access panel and crouched, unscrewing the cover with practiced efficiency. Upstairs, the CEO was conducting a pre-summit walkthrough for investors scheduled to arrive in 2 days. He'd overheard enough to know this event mattered, a livestream presentation, a showcase of new security architecture meant to impress the board. The irony wasn't lost on him. A flicker crossed one of the diagnostic monitors mounted along the wall. Just a blink. Barely perceptible. Caleb's gaze sharpened. He stood slowly, wiping his hands on a cloth. The monitor steadied again, numbers flowing in neat columns. Probably nothing. A minor latency spike. Still, something about the rhythm felt off. He watched another few seconds. A pattern, subtle, but there. He stepped closer, the hum of machines filling his ears. Fingers hovered over the edge of the console without touching it, not his jurisdiction, not his role. Footsteps echoed from the stairwell entrance. Marcus Hale descended, tablet in hand, frustration etched across his face. Facilities said there was a brief voltage dip. Minor fluctuation, Caleb replied evenly. Stabilized now. Marcus barely glanced at him. It's monitoring it. Probably vendor interference. Caleb nodded once. Probably. Marcus turned to leave, already distracted by a notification buzzing on his tablet. Left alone again, he studied the monitor. The flicker returned, longer this time. A whisper of instability beneath a flawless interface. He exhaled slowly. Above him, glass walls reflected confidence and control. Down here, among cables and hidden circuits, he felt something else entirely. A tremor building beneath the surface. And for the first time since selling the watch, Caleb felt the quiet certainty that the sacrifice he'd made might not be the last thing this tower would underestimate. The flicker held for half a second longer than before. Caleb didn't move at first. The low vibration in the mechanical room seemed to deepen, like the building had taken a slow breath and forgotten how to release it. He stepped closer to the diagnostic screen, watching the data ripple and then smooth out again. Upstairs, applause erupted faintly through the ventilation ducts, executives rehearsing confidence. His phone buzzed again. This time an automated email from Lena's school, final payment confirmed. Travel documents released. He closed the notification and slipped the phone back into his pocket. One sacrifice, one promise kept. Footsteps pounded down the metal stairs. Marcus reappeared, jaw tight. "We've got intermittent badge failures on level 32. You seeing anything down here?" "Voltage stabilized," Caleb replied. "But there's latency in the backup loop. It's subtle." Marcus frowned at the monitor. "Our new architecture shouldn't have latency." "It does," he said quietly. Marcus studied him for a second longer than before. "You sure?" Caleb nodded once. Yes, before Marcus could respond, his tablet chimed sharply. He scanned the screen, color draining from his face. Livestream test just glitched. That's not possible. Another tremor rolled through the hum of machinery. Marcus muttered under his breath and rushed back upstairs. Alone again, Caleb crouched beside an auxiliary panel and removed the cover, exposing bundled cables and labeled ports. His fingers traced along the conduit, not touching, just mapping. The pattern he'd sensed earlier was widening. A faint alarm pulsed once, then stopped. He stood, heart rate steady, mind accelerating. 2 floors above, in the executive corridor lined with abstract art and glass offices, Evelyn Thorne stood before a semicircle of department heads. Her reflection shimmered in the polished wall behind her, composed, immovable. "I want perfection," she was saying. "Investors don't forgive weakness." An assistant hurried in. "Ma'am, we're seeing access inconsistencies. It is investigating." Evelyn's eyes sharpened. "Then tell them to fix it." On the service level, Caleb replaced the panel cover and headed toward the stairwell instead of the elevator. The metallic clang of each step echoed upward. He wasn't rushing. He didn't need to. When he reached the 32nd floor landing, he saw it immediately, employees swiping badges twice, 3 times, red lights blinking where green should have been. "It worked this morning," someone whispered. Marcus stood near the security desk, frustration rising. "Override it manually. It's not responding," the security guard replied. Caleb approached quietly. "The system's looping." Marcus glanced at him. "Looping? Redundancy check is feeding itself," he said. "It'll lock everyone out if it escalates." Marcus hesitated. "How do you?" A sharper alarm cut through the hallway. Overhead lights flickered. From the far end of the corridor, Evelyn emerged, heels striking marble like punctuation. Her gaze landed on the cluster of employees, and then on him. "You," she said coolly, "why are you up here?" "Badge failures," he answered evenly. "We have it for that." "Yes," he said, "you do." The lights flickered again, longer this time. A ripple of unease passed through the staff. Marcus cleared his throat. He mentioned a latency issue earlier. Evelyn's expression didn't change. Maintenance speculating on network architecture is not helpful. Caleb met her gaze without challenge. "Speculation isn't what this is." A loud buzz echoed as every badge scanner in the corridor flashed red simultaneously. Someone swore under their breath. Evelyn turned to Marcus. "Fix it. We're trying," Marcus replied, fingers flying across his tablet. Caleb looked down the hall toward the secured conference suite, prepared for the investor summit. If the redundancy loop continued, the biometric locks would engage automatically. Once that happened, the executive floor would seal. He spoke carefully. "If you isolate the vendor access node before it cascades, we are not taking advice from facilities," Evelyn snapped, voice low but cutting. Silence thickened around them. Caleb stepped back. Understood. He turned and walked toward the stairwell again, the red scanner lights flashing behind him like a warning beacon. As he descended, the overhead announcement system crackled with static. Down on the mechanical level, the hum had shifted pitch, higher now, strained. He set his tool bag on a metal work table and exhaled slowly. This wasn't random. It was probing. His phone vibrated again, Lena sending a photo of her robotics team holding printed boarding passes. He stared at the image, a small smile touching his face despite the tension coiling in his chest. If you believe fathers shouldn't have to prove their worth twice, subscribe with the bell on because this story is just getting started. Above him, another alarm pierced the air, longer, sustained. The flicker on the diagnostic screen stretched into a visible stutter. Caleb reached for the console this time, not as maintenance, but as something the tower hadn't recognized yet. Caleb's fingers hovered over the console for one suspended second, then settled onto the keys. The screen pulsed with a ripple of cascading diagnostics, red lines threading through what should have been isolated systems. He exhaled slowly through his nose, scanning patterns instead of reacting to alarms. The hum in the mechanical room had shifted again, a sharper vibration crawling through steel beams and into bone. Above him, the overhead speakers crackled. Attention. Temporary access disruption on executive levels. Please remain calm. Remain calm. The words felt almost ironic. He tapped into the redundancy monitor, not overriding anything yet, just observing. The vendor node Marcus had dismissed earlier was pinging irregularly, sending recursive authentication requests through the system like a dog chasing its own tail. A deliberate loop. Footsteps thundered down the metal stairs again. Marcus burst into the room, tie loosened, tablet clutched tight. Now biometric scanners are freezing mid-read. It's spreading. It will, Caleb replied evenly. The loop's feeding itself. Marcus looked at the screen, then at him. You sound very sure. I am. Why? Caleb didn't answer that. Instead, he shifted slightly, angling the display so Marcus could see the vendor access node flashing at the edge of the network map. That node shouldn't be active, Marcus muttered. It shouldn't, he agreed. Upstairs, the building lights flickered again, longer this time. The mechanical hum dipped, then surged. Marcus swallowed. Investor rehearsal starts again in 20 minutes. Then you don't have 20 minutes, Caleb said quietly. For a brief second, their eyes locked, not maintenance and its director, but two men measuring risk. The stairwell doors slammed open once more. Evelyn descended this time, heels striking metal steps with sharp authority. Even here, in the underbelly of the building, she carried the executive floor with her, the scent of expensive perfume cutting through oil and ozone. Explain, she demanded. Marcus gestured at the console. We're seeing recursive authentication loops from a vendor access node. It's affecting executive-level clearance. Evelyn's gaze shifted to Caleb, who stood with calm steadiness beside the monitor. And why, she asked coldly, is he at my security console? Caleb met her eyes without defiance. Because it's not just security, she folded her arms. Enlighten me, he kept his tone even. The loop is a probe. It's testing system response thresholds. If it escalates, the building will initiate a self-protective lockdown. Executive floors first. Marcus stiffened. That's not how our architecture works. It is if someone rewrote the vendor handshake protocol, Caleb replied. Silence pressed into the room, thick as humidity before a storm. Evelyn stepped closer to the console, eyes scanning data she clearly didn't fully understand, but refused to admit it. Are you suggesting we've been breached? She asked. I'm suggesting, Caleb said carefully, that you will be. The lights dimmed abruptly, then surged back. Somewhere above them, a collective gasp echoed faintly through ductwork. Marcus's tablet chimed again, urgent and shrill. He read quickly. Livestream preview just cut out for 12 seconds. Evelyn's jaw tightened. Fix it. Caleb didn't move. She noticed. Well, if I isolate the vendor node now, he said, I can stop the loop before it cascades. But once I start, it'll reroute load through the old backbone. Marcus blinked. The pre-upgrade backbone? That's barely used. It's stable, Caleb replied. Evelyn's eyes narrowed. Your maintenance, yes. And you're advising my IT director to revert to obsolete infrastructure? For 5 minutes, he answered calmly. That's all it would take. Her silence was colder than anger. You don't get to improvise on my systems, she said at last. Caleb held her gaze. Then your systems will improvise on you. The words hung in the air. A deep metallic thunk reverberated through the floor, followed by a series of rapid beeps from the console. Marcus swore under his breath. Executive corridor scanners just went full red. Evelyn turned sharply toward the stairs. Handle it, she snapped at Marcus. As she ascended, heels striking harder now, the tension followed her like static electricity. Marcus lingered 1 second longer. You're not just guessing, he said quietly. No. Then what aren't you telling me? Caleb glanced back at the flashing vendor node. That whoever built this exploit understands layered redundancy, he replied. And they're patient. Marcus's throat tightened. Can you stop it? Yes, the answer came without arrogance, without hesitation. Marcus studied him as though seeing something new, something that didn't fit the uniform and tool belt. Before he could say more, the overhead lights in the mechanical room flickered violently, plunging them into half-shadow. The console screen glitched, then stabilized. But the vendor node was no longer just flashing, it was multiplying. The vendor node multiplied again. 1 blinking signal became 3. Then 5. Marcus stared at the screen as if it might correct itself under pressure. That's not possible, he muttered. We sandboxed vendor access after the upgrade. Caleb leaned closer, the glow from the monitor sharpening the angles of his face. You sandboxed the visible ports. Marcus looked at him. What does that mean? It means whoever's inside isn't knocking on the front door. Another sharp metallic thud echoed through the building's frame. The lights dimmed, surged, then dimmed again. The mechanical hum beneath their feet shifted into an uneven rhythm, like a heart developing arrhythmia. Upstairs, voices rose, confusion layered over forced calm. Marcus ran a hand through his hair. The executive elevators just stalled between floors. Fail-safe mode, Caleb said quietly. It's starting. Marcus's tablet chimed in rapid succession, notifications stacking faster than he could read them. 32nd floor is sealed. Marcus breathed. Biometric faults locking down. Caleb straightened slowly. Then you're about 3 minutes from full cascade. Marcus looked at him sharply. You keep saying that like you've seen it before. Caleb didn't answer immediately. The vendor nodes flickered again, spreading along the network map like cracks in ice. He could feel the building straining now, tension vibrating through pipes and beams. Footsteps pounded down the stairs once more. This time the door burst open with urgency rather than authority. Evelyn stepped inside. No entourage, no polished